So it is a great pleasure. What I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce Dr. Maribel Alvarez, and then she is going to introduce all the other panelists as in turn. So I will tell you now that Dr. Alvarez is a nationally acclaimed anthropologist, folklorist, curator, and community arts expert. She holds a dual appointment as Associate Research Professor in the School of Anthropology here and Public Folklorist at the Southwest Center at the University of Arizona. She also serves as the Executive Director of the Southwest Folklife Alliance, which is an affiliate nonprofit unit of the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences here at the U of A. Dr. Alvarez is a trustee of the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress and the recipient in 2009 of a Fulbright Fellowship to Mexico. She's documented the practice of more than a dozen of the country's leading emerging and alternative artistic organizations from Maine to Hawaii to El Paso and Los Angeles. And here at the university, she teaches courses on methods of cultural analysis with particular emphasis on food, objects, oral narratives, and visual cultures of the United States-Mexican border. She's published and lectured widely about poetry and food, and intangible heritage, nonprofits and cultural policy, the theory of arts, participation, artisans, and patrimony in Mexico, and popular culture and stereotypes. So, and we're going to hear more about her other projects, which are legion and incredibly important in many communities. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Maribel Alvarez.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here on a Friday afternoon. We've been looking forward to being with you. And thank you, Dr. Brown, for your leadership in the Graduate College, doing great work. And I'm honored to have my colleagues here join me today. We'll have an informal conversation. I hope we won't cover all of the time so that you can get to ask us some questions. Here to my left, Liane Hernandez from the YWCA. We also call her Chef Liane, and you'll learn about that and the relationship that she has with the Alliance. Monica Surfaro-Spigelman, who is also involved in our line of work related to end of life, and she'll tell us all about that. Imelda Cortez, who is one of our collaborators in a project we have in South 12th Avenue with the food bank in the City of Tucson Office of Sustainability, and Tierra y Libertad, mapping food systems in South 12. And from Tucson Meet Yourself, which is our largest program, Richard Noel, who's a musician and great tradition bearer of his own cultural heritage. And all of them will have 5 minutes or so to tell us a little bit about what they do and their notion. I think I want to open up by making a couple of general statements about collaboration and the Alliance. We're running a slideshow at some point. If it is too distracting, if it's distracting you, we should turn it off and just make an image fix. So it's your judgment, it's your decision. These are just images of some of the people. I was just telling Liane, so the word collaboration is so intrinsic and so embedded in everything we do and the reason for our existence that sometimes we don't even think about it in a more concrete, intentional way. When we formed the Alliance, it was 3 years ago, but it was only a change in the name. Before that, it was Tucson Meet Yourself, under the umbrella through which we did all the work. Tucson Meet Yourself, just to be really quick, was founded in 1974. So this is our 44th year producing the festival. And it was founded by Dr. James Griffith, who was at the time here at the university, ended up retiring from the university. He was a professor in the English department, teaching folklore, an anthropologist. And at the time, Tucson Meet Yourself was one of the leading festivals following the lead in 1967 of the American Folklife Festival, which was staged in the nation's capital. It's still staged every year in the mall in Washington, D.C. during the summer. And the first one was in 1967, and the idea was that communities will then organize these sort of celebrations of heritage and identity for their communities. So we were pretty early on one of those festivals, and funny enough, one of the ones that have has lasted the most, the longest, since that original founding. As the years went by, the festival went through so many different forms. The festival is huge, 100,000 people over 3 days, over 45 to 65 different ethnicities represented, 56 food vendors, 300 artists, all of those things. And we began to think, what else can we do since we produce this event and it is part of the cultural and the heritage and we have all this knowledge? How can we do the work in a more intentional way, using some of the skills that we have as folklorists, that we're tapping into our relationship with the communities? And that's when the idea of the Southwest Folklife Alliance came. What if we created an organization that did a couple of things? Did all of that work of the festival, but in the areas of community development, health, end of life, foodways, food security, all these other areas that were impacted where we feel that because of our perspective on culture, we have something to add. Secondly, what if we did it regionally, not just in Tucson? What if, and we always thought we want to do this work regionally, but it'd be pretty funny to go to Phoenix or Douglas or Yuma and say, and this is brought to you by Tucson Meet Yourself. So we thought we need a name that really captures more of the region. So that's where we came up. And the third thing was, how could we then leverage the relationship with the university? Since I'm a folklorist, part of my job was to run the festival. Dr. Griffith was a folklorist, was a professor. We use a lot of resources of students as researchers, as the energy. Tucson Meet Yourself includes like 600 volunteers. Many of them are U of A students. So how do we do it? And then we decided, well, we should form a formal affiliation agreement with the university. Just to let you know, in case you think that that was easy, it took 2 years of talking to lawyers. How can a nonprofit that is governed separately as a different nonprofit organization from the university have the affiliation with the university? And we went through a lot of things, including eventually they made us change our logo and the colors so that they reflect and are consistent with university colors. We get to use the University of Arizona logo in our publications. We are able to use university facilities and space and share some staff and all of these things, and it took a long time to form that kind of a model. We are a bit of a ambitious organization because we're only 2.5, almost 3 years old, and we run over 20 programs, all of which have very different partnerships in the communities. So thinking about that, I just want to say, a lot of the times people say, how could you be a relatively small organization in a short time, be a professor, do all of these things, teach this, and run 20 programs? And I tell them, because we really don't run them, all of them, because we have collaborations. Because the model that we use is of collaboration, is that you can expand what you do, and you sit at the table when you know what you can bring to the table, right? Sometimes what we bring to the table is technical expertise. Sometimes we are the grant writers. Sometimes we are the ones who can convene people. Sometimes we pay for the food. Sometimes we are the ones who can get a car reserve at the motor pool and allow somebody to go do something with the university resource that they wouldn't have access to. Sometimes we are just a fiscal agent, letting somebody else get the money, but running it through our nonprofit status. So for us, collaboration means adding whatever value is important to the project and the partners, and then moving out of the way. Not really being the ones who have to control every single agenda, every single meeting, every single person that is hired, every single person that has a meeting in the community, but just kind of moving out and being a partner. And that's the reason why we're able to do so much in so many different arenas, ranging from food and city planning and festivals and community organizing to end of life, working with actual direct providers in hospices, in hospitals, and trainings, in medicals, all of that. So I just wanted to open up with those comments and say that's the model. I always say it's not that hard to do the right thing. You know what you have to do the right thing? Do the right thing, right? Remember a couple of things. It's not about you. a lot of the work we do is not about us. It's not about me advancing my career, me advancing my ego, me making sure that I have. And for us, it's been really wonderful to have the University of Arizona trust this model and let us work within this scope of engagement that really says being a partner and alliance means that sometimes the university is in the front seat, sometimes it's in the middle seat, and sometimes the university is in the back seat. But we're still partners. So I don't think there are any other more profound lessons or secrets that I can share than that. And the founder of the organization, Tucson Meet Yourself, and Dr. Jim Griffith, one time I was with him at a meeting with the Yaqui community, celebrating a Yaqui celebration, Pascua Yaqui, and I saw these ladies come to him and started kissing him and saying, "Dr. Griffith, it's so wonderful to see you," and they will grab his hands and they will touch his face, and it's so wonderful. And sometimes anthropologists are not that much loved in Native American communities. So I was like, wow, they really, and everybody was coming by and saying, "It's so wonderful to see you, Dr. Griffith." So after the meeting passed, I went up to him because he's a mentor to me. He's now in his 80s. And I said, "Jim, what did you do to work so well with the communities, to be loved by them this way, to be respected?" And he said, in his typical way, "It's very easy. You just show up and then you shut up." And that's pretty much my guidance. I try to show up, and then I try to shut up. So, following my own advice, I'm going to ask my collaborators here to share some brief stories, and then we can open it up for questions that you have about the models of the work that we're doing.
Good afternoon. How are y'all doing? Yeah, thank you so much for being here and sharing this afternoon with us. So I have the distinct honor of being able to run the Culture Kitchen, what was formerly called the Culture Kitchen for Tucson Meet Yourself. Perhaps you also heard of the festival as Tucson Eat Yourself? Yeah? And how many of you have attended the festival? Oh, fantastic. Well, for those who haven't, we invite you to come and get to know the tastes of Tucson. Last year was an interesting opportunity for us because the city of Tucson has been named the first city of gastronomy here in North America. No, in the United States, excuse me. In North America, we share that distinct honor with Ensenada. And so we changed some stuff around last year, and we have what was called the City of Gastronomy Kitchen Stadium. And just so you all know, a little bit of background about me, I've been a chef in this community for about the last 15 years, and I've worked in food service here since I was 18. And all through my time here at the university. And so I have met and have realized that the culinary community here in Tucson is incredibly small. Like any other community has its own nomenclature and design and relationships. And so what I was curious about with this new designation is what are the components that allowed this whole designation to happen, and what does that look like? And is there a possibility for there ever being an articulation of a Tucson cuisine? That's what I was curious about. I also have a degree in cultural anthropology and folklore. Big Jim was my professor, and we spent many an evening at the Pascua Yaqui tribes celebrations. So anyway, I digress. So that was my question and curiosity. And so this last year we had this opportunity, and so I assembled friends and folks that I was really curious about to come and talk about what they were doing in order to articulate this this just gastronomical move that's happening here in Tucson. And so we heard from not only farmers and culinary practitioners, but also folks who are working in different types of botanicals. John Slattery, who works a lot in acorns, and if you're ever interested in hearing about acorns and how incredible and how important and fundamental they have been to American or to human evolution, I invite you to come and talk to him. He's amazing. We also heard from Tierra y Libertad and Flowers and Bullets, who are two community organizing groups around food and barrio sustainability. And so talking about how they're looking at the issues of sustainability from the perspective of the barrio, and the idea that the barrio knows what it needs in order to survive and to flourish and to thrive. We also heard a lot of information from a lot of different farmers. There was a group of women farmers who have been gathering and organizing called Agua, Arizona, oh gosh, I just lost it. But basically Arizona Women in Agriculture. And so conversations around what it is to be a farmer in this particular time, in this particular economy, with this new influx of information and interest in Arizona grown and Tucson's particular grown agriculture. And what a challenge it is between how sexy it looks in glossy photos and the reality of being on welfare when you're trying to feed other people. So that was a really interesting conversation. Food producers, people who are producing chickens and turkeys and ducks and eggs right here in community so that we can have food that is uniquely local and a food shed that can sustain us should anything ever happen in our community. So there was a wide range of conversations, wine and beer producers, and just looking at what it means and what are the various components and inputs and outputs of this new gastronomic environment that we find ourselves within. So this year, I'm hoping to continue that conversation, but also to integrate also our refugee and immigrant populations back into the conversation, and to see how these foodways are influencing our overall palate here in Tucson. So I invite you again, and thank you for having us here.
Thank you, Liane. And as you can see, Liane's employment is with the YWCA, which is another organization that is doing a lot of work on community empowerment, women business development, really thoughtful organizing around questions of human rights, civil rights. So for us, it's a natural to have this partnership. And Liane, a lot of people used to think of the festival only as a place where you just go listen to music and you hang out and you see artisans and you look and then you eat a lot of food. But to just provide this kind of level of thoughtful programming and conversation all 3 days in a rotation was one of the great benefits of something that you look for people who have the expertise to provide that and to run with it. And so she curates that season. She knows what she wants. She calls on other partners, and it's all very collaborative and extends the value of the performances and of everything else that happens by this level of in-depth. Next to Liane is Monica, who's been with Tucson Meet Yourself, Southwest Folklife Alliance. She's a writer. She led our wonderful publication, e-journal. If you haven't subscribed, go to our website and subscribe to Border Lore. Monica was the editor of Border Lore for the last 5 years. A lot of reporting about the region. Monica came to us a few years ago and said, there's this grant opportunity to do end of life. We should do something about that because we are the experts on cultural diversity. And I'll let her talk about how she has been representing our work in the End of Life Coalition, and all of the publications she's passing around are things that she has been able to gather along with a bunch of wonderful collaborators. So Monica.
And I'll stand. I think that might be better for everyone. But first of all, you have to feel badly for me. Okay, I'm going to tell you why. I'm sandwiched in here between all the happy parts of culture that you're most familiar with. Food, performance, right? There's something that I'm involved with, and actually I've been involved with Maribel for more than 8 years on the happy matters as well. But the program that I'm going to speak to you about a little bit now is actually something more abstract and something we tend not to want to speak about, and that's death, grieving, mourning, and end of life. And I'm actually very happy to be in a room like this with a lot of young people, because death is not something that just happens to old people. Death can happen tomorrow, this afternoon. It can happen at any age. And so the point is, death is a conversation that we all have to have. And it is probably found to be most comforting if you speak about it in the context of culture. Now, Maribel said it was my idea to talk about end of life, but I'd like to just tell you a little bit about the conversation we had in 2013 and talk to you about the evolution of the program, which is still ongoing. It's ongoing right now. It's involved with other aspects of the university. It's also involved with medical practices, holistic organizations, and other nonprofits. So we're at the table talking about end of life and bringing culture onto the table with a lot of different disciplines, and that's what's made it impactful for me. I worked with Maribel, I think it's eight years in Tucson Meet Yourself. And now, for the past 3 or 4 years, it's been with End of Life. So in 2013, I had just come back from New York. I'm a New Yorker, retired here in Tucson. I'm corporate, retired from United Parcel Service. And I'd come back from New York. One of the things I do on a regular basis when I return to New York is visit the cemeteries. And I had come back home, and Maribel called. And she mentioned that there was this grant that was talking about end of life. And how can we bring the subject of culture into end of life? And so what Maribel wanted to do was to just mine the rich deposits of culture that exist here in our ethnic and our alternative communities as well, and in communities at risk. And it was a good idea. We presented it to the Community Foundation of Southern Arizona, and we received a grant. We called the project Continuum, and I just want to read the definition of continuum: a coherent whole characterized as a collection. And to us, the word continuum was symbolic of what we wanted to talk about, the collection of diverse practices, material culture, and beliefs that exist in the Tucson area, but also in southern Arizona, and how the different groups reflect these practices in end of life. We gathered, we put out the search, and approximately 28 people from the community decided to participate as citizen folklorists. We held an intense field school training program to teach people like me what field work was all about and what it was like to document work in the community that might be considered folklore. We had a number of different texts I brought because I was coming to an academic institution. I just wanted to show you the field workbook that we used in the study, and it's an excellent book if you want to take a look at it later. The 28 people who were involved in the training actually became a cohort. We had 3 different groups mentored by folklorists who went out into the community to identify areas of interest for themselves and document what those practices were regarding end of life. So we had, and if you look through the booklets there, you can see we had ethnic groups represented, Persian, Mexican American, Italian American, Ethiopian, range of different ethnic groups. We had at-risk populations represented, refugee populations. We had alternative communities, like our atheist group, like bikers, represented, and we had the nations represented, Tohono O'odham and also Pascoyaqui. And what resulted after about 3 or 4 months of field work, again mentored by Dr. Alvarez and Dr. Hartman, who's out in Iowa right now, but he was here at the university. What resulted was documentation, field reports, which ultimately wound up first as part of this journal that you're taking a look at now, but then what also wound up as those 4 different booklets that you're looking at as well. We subdivided, once we had everything documented, we put it online, we put it in this journal, and then we also created 4 distinct booklets. One on food, since that's such an important topic, people talking about death food and traditions regarding food, and beliefs regarding food in end of life. We talked about shrines and markers, descansos, the various adornment that people use to make themselves comforted and to express themselves in terms of end of life. We also talked about those alternative areas. We separated it out. So you'll see one booklet there where atheism is represented, where we have a segment on ghost bikes, LGBTQ communities. We had those, and people who just don't want to look at end of life or mourning through faith's eyes. And we also had another booklet that specifically talked about remedies, the traditional folk remedies involved with comforting, and also what people use to anoint the bodies with end of life. So those were the booklets. But I think you know as well, just like we're talking here today, dialogue is also important. So in addition to the materials that we created, we also held community forums. There was one just beautiful. I'm sorry if you did not attend, but I strongly encourage you to get his book, Dr. Renata Rosaldo. Just beautiful book, and a beautiful man who talked about his experiences with death and read from his book regarding his wife's death and the process that he went through, the mourning process. That was one community forum. And then last year, we were privileged to go down to the Y, and Liane helped us create a Death Over Dinner. I don't know if you've ever heard of Death Over Dinner or the Deaf Cafe movement, but Death Over Dinner is something that's going on around the country. And it's just an opportunity to spend time with people, you know, talking about death, which doesn't have to always be such a horrible, morbid subject. And Liane brought alive a lot of the foods that we talk about in that food booklet that you have in front of you. We had a number of other programs as well in the communities that brought in caseworkers, social workers, medical practitioners as well to talk about it. Continuum is ongoing, and this is really the last thing I want to mention that's important in terms of collaboration and interdisciplinary approach. And the End of Life Coalition, there is one here in Tucson, the Pima County End of Life Coalition, in which the university is strongly involved, a number of different schools, not just our involvement with them. Also TMC, UMC, Banner, all the hospitals are involved as well as the hospices. And we sit on that coalition. And as Maribel has said, we bring to the table an ability to help medical practitioners better understand how culture has to be figured into a quality of life equation. When a doctor is working with a family at a hospital, and that person, the patient, is dying, there needs to be an understanding or a sensitivity. And our work, I feel, has helped people better understand how to integrate culture and then integrate dignity and respect into everything. And isn't that what culture is all about? Just better understanding each other and finding the common ground.
Wonderful. So to keep on track here, more recently we were starting to expand our work with sitting at the table with city planners and Department of Economic Developments and people who are looking at neighborhoods and how do we avoid gentrification if it's going to start, since downtown is so successful, what are the next vulnerable communities that may actually be on the eyes of developers and things like that. And again, working with the food bank of the community food bank that has an incredible program of food security. And we have been able to launch this project at, we call it La Doce, which is South 12th Avenue, which has a concentration of some of the best Mexican food. It's the place where the buses that come from Mexico actually stop there, and people take the buses to go back. And one of the important things about that project, which Imelda will talk about now, is the fact that we really had to trust that community to do the work themselves. We couldn't just go in there and say, okay, so we started this mapping project, questionnaires, data gathering, but we are employing 20 members of the community themselves to do the work, just like the model we use with the end of life. So Imelda Cortez can tell you all about it.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah, okay, cool. Hello, everybody, thank you for being here. So yeah, I worked in La Doce project, which is the 12th, if you want to translate it into English, basically. And my investment in this project stems from much more than mapping where the good food is at or where the green spaces in the community is there, right? I was born and raised in that neighborhood, basically, right? I went to school there. My family is there. So my perspective is very different. And this is where the model that Dr. Alvarez was talking about, right? Like they came and they said, okay, we have this. You want to work on it? And I said, yes. And then they left, right? And it's great because who knows the community better than the people who live there, who are there every single day, who go to school there, right? So basically it's about 20 of us, is that what you said? About 20 of us. And it's a range of high school students and also adult community members, and we all work together. And I have the shirt on because this is how I represent, right? So one thing that is very important when you're doing community work is if you see, I mean, just think about this, right? If you see a bunch of kids walking around with like clipboards, writing things down, you're not necessarily going to take them, like you take them seriously, but it's kind of like, why are you here? It's like, what are you doing? What do you really want, right? So when you see people, you know, in kind of like a uniform way, people come to us, right, as opposed to running away from us. So that's kind of like, I feel, the message of the shirt. And basically what we've been doing is walking around the neighborhood with clipboards and talking to some members of the community and asking them what their culture is, their ties to that neighborhood is, what kind of garden projects they have going on, and what they would like to see in the future, right? And this is another very important thing about the project, is that we might be taking notes and seeing things from like an anthropological way. I wasn't trained in any of that. But really taking whatever the neighborhood wants and needs and implementing it back again, right? But also, more importantly, looking at the assets that the community already has, right? Because we always, if anybody's from Tucson, you think of South Tucson and it's a really bad neighborhood, right? But I mean, it's not, right? There's a lot of assets there. There's people already producing food. You know, there's a lot of like mechanic work that's happening, which we all need mechanics sometimes, right? People who can build homes. There's a lot of assets there in the neighborhood, right? So really looking at that and how we can implement the things that are already there without having to bring outside people, right? Which then turns into gentrification, right? And that's the one thing that we're really trying to not have in our neighborhood, because my neighborhood is beautiful the way that it is, and we don't need anybody else to come in and beautify it for us, right? So yeah, that's all I got.
Thank you, Imelda. And the T-shirt, if you cannot see it, it says "Food Reporter," yeah. And that's what they're wearing. And the design was also done by the community members. And one of the great things about that project is that there are many levels of it. There's a questionnaire, and we come in whenever we're necessary. So I'm not really doing the work that Imelda is doing. But about 2 weeks ago, I received a call from Nelda Ruiz from Tierra y Libertad saying, hey, we have the questionnaire ready to go. Could you look at it? Give us an opinion. Are we missing something? And that's as simple as that. Sometimes that's what we call collaboration. And it's like, sure, let's meet. I looked it over. I was like, well, let me make a couple of suggestions. What do you think? So it came all together by us being very transparent about what is being done and who needs. And also, very important, compensation. Sometimes when an organization gets a grant, we have 2 projects right now, a project in the Yaqui homelands in Sonora, and we have a project recording ethnobotany of Yaqui foodways in Marana. A lot of times you get these projects and the nonprofit takes all the funds and nobody gets any money. So we are paying and compensating each one of the reporters with almost it's a paid internship, right? And we are supporting these other collaborators that are doing the work of ethnobotany, and in Sonora too, we are making sure that people have a livable wage to be able to do what they do and not just exploit the communities by saying, oh, could you do all this labor for us for free, but my nonprofit got the big grant. But just being able to say when a grant is, to be transparent and say the grant is for $25,000 and 2/3 of that will go directly to the project, and we'll just take a little bit so that we can cover our expenses, and flip that equation where you really are sort of putting the money in the resources in the program as opposed to the nonprofit sort of hoarding all of the funds and creating an aura of suspicion about what is it that you're doing with these grants. And in that way, we're sort of trying to use the very imperfect model of the nonprofit industrial system, but also trying to flip it on its head by saying even within that imperfect system, we can still try to practice some ethical social justice ideas of sharing the wealth, even though it's a system that we don't control,
You did it with EOL, too.
Yeah, with EOL, we pay everybody to Tucson Meet Yourself, now passing it on. We also pay all our artists that want to be paid. In 2015, out of our festival budget, the expenses that we had in paying artists was $46,000. So everybody got anywhere from $75 to $150 to $1,000 to even more if you put on a performance that requires some investment. And because of that, I think there's a sense of transparency and trust that we also have to talk about the bottom line when we talk about these collaborations. And that's really hard sometimes at the university because universities get big grants and there are like administrative overheads that have to be covered. So working with the Southwest Folklife Alliance allows us to have a nonprofit that sometimes, in some cases, not all cases, is able to get those funds in a faster, quicker way to the community more directly as opposed to filling 300 forms of paperwork to pay somebody $100. Which sometimes, because of systems, we have to do through the university. So that's also an important aspect of being an ethical collaborator. I'm going to pass it to make this the final presentation, Richard Noel, who's our beloved artist, and he can tell us about where he comes from and what he brings in his bag of tricks.
Thank you, Dr. Alvarez. Fellow team members and my beautiful audience, how you all doing? Good. How you all doing? Good. All right, let's go. I want you all to join me here. Come on. Hey. always an honor and pleasure of, truly expressing what you love doing and what your soul is yearning for. I'm originally from the twin island of Trinidad and Tobago, home of the steel drum, calypso, and the limbo, if any of you all remember that. But, what I really want to share with you all is that it's really good when we can bring different artists together for 3 days to really express their heart desire, their culture, their heritage, and really showcase it for the listening audience, and also keeping the listening audience engaged. It's very, very important. At the festival, we play a lot of country music. Right, Maribel?
Yes, we do.
But from different countries. Don't get... Hope you don't get disappointed. And it's very vital. It's very vital for us, because one of the things that we observe is that many people, they don't know their neighbor, or they don't understand culture, especially, with no disrespect to any media person here. Sometimes the media portray certain cultures or religious belief in a different way. And it's only as we, as the listening audience, when we actually taste their food and see what they could do from a musical standpoint and from a heritage standpoint, what happened? We get more respect for them. And we respect that culture, and we respect that heritage. So Tucson Meet Yourself is one of the traditions that break that barrier, where you could truly find knowledge and really understand and embrace the culture of different performing artists. As we all know, music have no barriers. It's a universal language. I could bring a performer from Iraq or Afghanistan, and you might understand what they are saying, or from Japan. But just the vibes and the way in which they express and they showcase their culture, you will applaud them at the end of their duration. Is that true? Yeah. So this is why it's very important for us as a panel to choose the right artists, and the artists that truly have their soul into what they're doing. Because the festival has been around since 1975, and we know the human species, we have evolved from 1974, to now. We are an audio-visual group of people. We want people gotta amaze us. And it's a real task for Dr. Alvarez to put a performing stage together for 3 days that could really amaze our listening audience. Before, you could have fooled people, but now people could go on YouTube and truly look and see. Is that true? So you got to be genuine, and we got to look for genuine artists. Because one of the things Dr. Alvarez always talk about is sustainability. How could we sustain the festival? And how could we truly sustain it so we could get funding, and the people could be engaged and could truly appreciate what they are witnessing at the same time. So I really wanted to share with you, just for one last moment, I had an opportunity for a couple of years to do a carnival parade. And I don't know if any one of you have ever been to the Caribbean to witness a carnival parade with people dancing and costuming and really expressing themselves because of the heritage that it came from. And it was very successful, and when I look back, it's because the goal was not just to perform, but to really impact my listening audience by truly having that, I hope this is the right word, but replica of what really happened in Trinidad and Tobago with the carnival. So it's very, very important. So Tucson Meet Yourself want to keep that tradition and keep that level of performance where we try to bring, or I shouldn't say try, but where we bring genuine artists who really love what they do and is interested in keeping the heritage of their culture, and who could really explain it so that the listening audience, while they're eating their Polish hot dogs or whatsoever, could really enjoy what they have seen. That's the end of my speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you so much. One last thing, and then I think we should take a few questions for you. The other thing about the festival that is very perhaps less known is that the festival is a fundraiser for all of the participating organizations. We raise all the funds to do all the publicity, the staging, all the power distribution, all of that, and that costs us about $300,000 every year, which we raise. But all the money that is raised in the festival, which is about $350,000, remains in the hands of all the participants and all of the food groups. And many groups use that funding to support and sustain their cultural transmission. So for example, the Wat Buddha Metta Temple has for years sold their food there, and they have been able to use all of the earnings from the festival to build the capital, to build their temple, and continue their Buddhist community. And the same with some of the African American churches, some of the special Native American communities. All of the funds, once they pay their basic fees, whatever they raise, it's something that they keep and reinvest in their organizations. So that's also been a really important aspect of the collaboration. I think you heard a lot now, so I think it's time for some questions. Dr. Brown, you think this will be a time? If you have any, but we probably will be happy to answer them if we can. Wow, that's a beautiful question. Anyone here really can answer that. Richard perhaps is one of the people that, let me point out, I mean, he's an example to me. I mean, I love him because he is a servant to other artists. So when he has brought his ideas of what he wants to produce, there's been a time, but then that's not every year. Another year, he's just the stage manager. Another year, he's the guy who goes and gets the drum set and puts it in his cars and sets it up and then returns it on Monday morning. So the fact that the ego is sort of like a non-hierarchical organization where you have to check. The ego is not about just you being the one person who benefits all the time from that. And Richard is an example with the performers. Liane is an example with the work that she does in the kitchen stadium, the work that Monica does, where she is one of many at a table of people who are actually caring for the dead, for people who are dying, people who are in suffering, and being at the same table with that, and not thinking that your answer is better than anybody else, but that they actually have something to contribute, but you are also authentically contributing your learning and your knowledge. So I think it's one of the big problems, though, let's be honest. A lot of the times people do come with, and sometimes it's not the bad intention of having an ego that gets in the way. Sometimes it's the way that the funding structures arrange that. So in the university, sometimes you're required to be the principal investigator, the PI in a grant. And sometimes it's hard to then feel like you're not the one holding the control because your name is on the grant and somebody you have to sign. But that's why the university partnership with community organizations can offer other models where you're not necessarily following the hierarchical model. Yeah, Monica.
But just also, I don't know if this was part of the question you had, but pride can also translate into dignity, a form of dignity. The tradition bearers that we have at Tucson Meet Yourself, but also the people of the community who express themselves in their gardens or, as in my case, talked about the practices on how they find comfort in end of life. The pride that they have in how we celebrate their tradition manifests into quality of life for them. So I don't have a problem really with pride.
Yeah, that's a great answer to that too. Yeah.
So a little bit branching off of that. So pride has a lot to do with how people. Okay.
Oh, great.
Can everybody hear the questions in the back?
So let me see if I can phrase this well. You guys have seemed to have every aspect of life covered in this celebration, except for one, science. How do you incorporate science, a celebration thereof, or a display thereof? Especially since science and technology and the development and refinement thereof has been fundamental in shaping culture.
Well,
Wow, great.
science is intrinsic in end of science. Excuse me, intrinsic in end of life. Maribel talked about the collaborations, the health practitioners who sit around the table with us integrate. Let's just take, for example, the folk remedies. There's a booklet being passed around about folk remedies. The potions that are developed, whether it's the compress for the forehead, for the ear, or to take internally to comfort when their loved one has died. It's a form of science, and the doctors we've worked with acknowledge that we contribute to the cultural aspects of science. Actually, narrative medicine, this is a whole different topic, but one of the things as part of the coalition, I don't know if the university here has courses in narrative medicine, but for practitioners, it's becoming a huge aspect of medicine to have doctors better communicate the stories of the people they're working with and helping themselves become better practitioners.
I suppose my answer to that question would be that maybe there's a false dichotomy between culture and science, and that if science is the way that we understand the universe, so is culture. And surely that it takes place with food and the way that we relate to one another. So, you know, that a grandmother speaking her truth about her culture and the perseverance of that culture through this piece of corn or through this tomato is the way that science is conveyed. And, you know, we have a lot of discussions on a lot of different levels. I mean, music being, you know, a universal language. I mean, I think that there's any number of aspects. So I think that science is woven into the tapestry. And I think that a lot of the audiences and surely a lot of the practitioners that I've worked with, a lot of the cooks that I've worked with, it's just what they do. There is no separation or need to explain that this is the science and this is the love and this is the family and this is the patience, but this is the food. Here's a plate I want to share with you. That would be my answer.
I mean, just what Liane said, right? Like everything is there. My culture is science every single day, right? Everything that I do, everything that you know, the notes that we're taking, food production and building a garden, right? So what you learn in university is it's a science that is inaccessible to the people that I work with, right? And according to the university, the gardens that are sometimes built in the neighborhoods that I live in are not right. So I don't know, I just feel like even the word science, it's kind of scary for some people, right? But the word culture, the word life, the lives that we live, everything's embedded, right?
One of the things that we really cherish in our line of work and working around the concept of folk life is the notion that there's expert knowledge and then there's everyday knowledge. So, for example, in the university here, we have people who learn how to write novels, beautiful novels, award-winning novels. We read novels. But not everybody writes a novel, but everybody tells stories. So what is the relationship between expert knowledge of being a novelist versus being a storyteller of anecdotes, of things that happen by memory? And I think that not devaluing either or. But because usually people in community settings really look up and appreciate what it is, expert knowledge. But they also don't want to be looked down. And I think that relationship of up and down is what really makes a difference. My parents my parents didn't have more than a high school education. My father was a plumber, my mother was a house, but they all valued education to such a degree. I mean, this is their aspirations, not only because they were immigrants, but being working class people, so my brother, my sister, and I all have higher advanced degrees. But how could you have a family of advanced degrees with, we're the children of working class, a plumber, It's like, because they actually value that. Now, once you have that degree, the challenge is not to look down on the plumber, right? And to think that I can write an essay and get it published, but I cannot fix a toilet once it's plugged in, And that is the dichotomy that gets us into trouble, I think, when we work with communities. To know that my mother, when we used to bring home books about psychology, when I was first taking Psychology 101, you know how that is when you first take your first psychology course in college, where you're like, oh my God, this is so interesting. And I used to read that to my mother, and she became an avid, interested person in everything psychological, But she'd never taken a class and probably never would. But it was a passion of hers, of the human curiosity. So in a lot of the work that we do is actually not, looking up is not a problem. It's just once you're up, looking down, that becomes the ethical challenge.
Yeah, because I think, the thing to not fall into, right, is that accessibility doesn't mean a lack of understanding or a lack of ability to know. Does that make sense? So we were talking about, so maybe the science classes that are available here might not be as accessible to community members, but that doesn't in any way impinge upon their interests or ability to know and want that information. Mm-hmm. And so that is what my takeaway from now my third year of TMY is, that the questions and curiosities and the depth to which those questions dive are so rich in community. So yeah, and that's a long-winded answer. Sorry.
I don't know if we've run out of time.
Yeah, this is the quickest hour I think I've spent in years, but could we take one more question and then maybe informally talk more over the reception? Thank you, Jose.
Hello, thank you. Good afternoon. My first question is, did you get in touch with any other ethnic group in Sonora besides Yaquis, for example, the Mayos or the Seris? And why did you, you talked about
Yes.
Yaquis. And the other question is, how deep did you get in touch with them? For example, during, hundreds of years, this kind of group, especially the Yaquis, has been in conflict with the government and with some part of the society, principally about the water stuff. They got some problem with the Hermosillo city when the last governor was trying to get some water from the Yaqui River to put it in the Hermosillo River, and it was a very important conflict. So, what do you think about that?
Yeah, about the relationship in Sonora with different groups. Well, we've had, through our many different levels, many different relationships. My Fulbright was specifically in Sonora working with wheat farmers, and so documenting the culture of trigo and culture of food in wheat production in Sonora. But we've also had, at the festival, for example, representatives from Sonora who come from the Rio Sonora area, who come to dance or to perform. We have some of the relationships of our field schools. We have taken our field school to Banamichi also, and we've been over there. And I think that there's a lot of relationships in the university with Sonora. The project we have with the Yaquis in VCAM right now, and it is specifically growing there for the first time heritage wheat. That is about 300-year-old seed, which we call white Sonora, and having we're testing a parcel with one of the schools and hoping to create out of that a Yaqui-owned enterprise of heritage wheat production. It's just with this particular community. We're just testing it, going slowly. The wheat is growing well, and we're going to see what it does, and then after that, develop some sort of marketing plan for a Yaqui-owned enterprise. Water is one of the considerations. If we expand that, I mean, right now we're just in a small demonstration parcel, and the wheat is doing well. But of course, if we begin to expand that there in matters of scale, then we will have to contend with larger issues of land and water rights and all of those things. So, yeah, we take a stand that we really need to learn a lot about a project. That's why I like the notion of also starting demonstration projects or small-scale things and then going from there, as opposed to thinking that we have a larger project. Because there are a lot of different ways and agencies and partners that you have to work with when you work internationally. So I hope that answers a little bit. I know we have food and appetizers and things, and we will be around to take more questions.